In the last lecture, we created our first Angular app, but we haven't changed anything there. So time to do that. And for that, you need an IDE or editor where you can write and edit your code. Now I'm using WebStorm here. WebStorm is a great IDE, great for Angular development, but it's not free. A great free alternative would be Visual Studio Code, which you can find on code.visualstudio.com. This is a great IDE and it is free. You can simply download and install it both for Mac and Windows. And then you can start developing Angular with that. Whichever IDE or editor you install, you'll always have to open a new folder. In WebStorm case, it's just called open. And then simply navigate to the folder you created. So in my case here, it's my first app. Select that folder and open it. And now it will load that folder and all the files into the IDE on your system. So in my case, it now looks like that. Now, this is the project loaded into the IDE. Now, it's still indexing it here, but it'll be done in a second. And these are all the folders and files the Angular CLI created for you. This is your entire Angular project. Now, as I said, this might look intimidating because you got so many files in there. Most of these files are just doing some configuration work and you don't really need to touch them. One interesting file is the package.json file. Here you can see all the dependencies of your project, like Angular 6. And these are these third-party packages your project needs to run correctly. All dev dependencies are only required for development for this build workflow I was talking about. But we're here to edit our code, right? So let's jump into the source folder because that is where our code is. E2E is for end-to-end testing. We'll ignore this. And node modules is where all these dependencies you see in the package.json file actually were installed. But we're interested in the source code, so let's go to source. Then we got a bunch of other configuration files. And then here, we got this app folder. And in this app folder, we see some other files. Of course, I'll dive into what they all do in detail in this course. And for now, let's open the app component HTML file. And here we indeed see something which looks deceivingly like what we saw in the browser. Do you remember? It's welcome to app and so on. We see that here too. By the way, make sure you keep that localhost 4002 process running. So that ng-serve process you started here in the terminal. Make sure to keep that running. If you're done with development for the day, you can quit it with Ctrl-C and you'll get out of there. But as long as you are developing, you should keep it running because it will automatically watch your files and rebuild your project whenever you change and save something. Now, since I quit it, I'll need to restart it. And I will actually restart it here in my IDE. There's a built-in terminal, but it's the normal system terminal. So here I can also run ng-serve to bring that back up. But back to the app component HTML file. We're outputting something here. And if we change anything here like, hi, this is instead of welcome to, and we save that with ng-serve running. If we go back, you see it automatically updated, hi, this app. Now, one strange thing we see is that this app here, well, we actually only see these curly braces and title in the app component HTML file. And therefore, we can already see some of the work Angular does here. Angular is, of course, not a tool to allow us to write static HTML files. We would need no framework for that. It allows us to mix static HTML code and dynamic things we want to output in that code. And actually, what we have here is one of these components Angular works with, the app component. A component always has a template, the HTML code, possibly has some stylings in the CSS file, though it's empty here, as you can see. And importantly, it has a TypeScript file. If we enter this is TypeScript. And this is now the definition of the component. This is what will be converted to normal JavaScript by the build workflow. And in this file, we see a couple of interesting things like add component. I'll come back to that and what in detail is happening here in the next module. We also see title equals app. Now, what's that? If we go back to the app component HTML file, we also saw title here, right? Between the curly braces. So an assumption would be that the title in the TypeScript file is related to that. So let's maybe change this to my app. And now if we save this, it recompiles. And if we go back, we see, hi, this my app. Now this might not be perfect English, but we can definitely see that something changed. And this is so-called data binding in action. Of course, also a concept we'll dive in deeply in this course. And this is how we can output dynamic content, and this could of course be content that is calculated dynamically or retrieved from a server in our HTML code. Now interesting, if we right-click on the loaded page and inspect the page source, we don't actually see that code there. We just see a bunch of script imports at the bottom. That is our build code and the Angular framework code. The head tag here, and then this strange app root part. Now, app root is also something we see in the app component TypeScript file. Here, the selector. So it looks like this is basically like our own HTML tag we're creating. And that's indeed what's happening here. The page we're viewing here, to which this source belongs, actually is this index.html file in the source folder. Here we also see app root. The script imports are missing because they are injected dynamically. Now what Angular does in the end is we always load this page, then we have these dynamically injected script imports, and these script imports will dynamically replace app root with our own component. And of course we can have more than one component in Angular apps. Again, these are all things we'll dive into in this course. Now that's all nice. Let's do something more fancy. Let's change title dynamically. So back in the app component, I'll actually get rid of the entire code in here, and I'll add an input instead, a normal HTML input, type text. Below that, I'll add a paragraph where I want to output, let's say, a name. Now, name is not something we defined yet. We'll do so in a second. Let's go to app component, and let's change title to name. And I'll say Max here because that is my name. And if I save that, I go back, we see the input and we see the name. Now I want to be able to enter something in the input and automatically change the name. And we can do this with a tool provided by Angular, a so-called directive, which is called ngModel. Now you'll learn the exact syntax throughout the course. For now, let's simply add square brackets, parentheses, ngModel, written like that. Make sure to get the casing correct. There is no dash in between or anything like that. So ngModel in square brackets and parentheses on the input, and set it equal to name. So to the same name you're outputting here. Now this is a so-called directive, and what it does is it basically tells Angular to listen to anything you enter here and store it in this name property, in this name model, but also on the other hand, output the value of the name model in this input. This is what we're doing here. Now, if we save this, we don't see anything on the page, and if we open the developer tools, which you can simply do from the menu or with the shortcut, you reach it under View, Developer Tools in Chrome, and I strongly recommend using Chrome for this course since it has the best developer tools. So then we see here in the console part, there's an error. Can't bind to ngModel since it isn't a known property of input. So somehow Angular doesn't understand ngModel. Now that's strange because I said it's built in, right? Angular is actually split up into multiple modules, sub-packages you could say. And we need to add them if you want to use a certain feature from them. And in this course, you will learn about the different packages and which features they contain. To add such a feature, we go to that other file we haven't had a look at yet, the app module. This is basically where we tell Angular which pieces belong to our app. And there we have to add something to imports, to import another package from Angular. So we need to import it at the top of the file first, because TypeScript always needs to know where things are. So we import something from, and then it's at Angular/forms. This is one other package from the Angular framework. And from that package, we can import the forms module, written like this. So make sure to add this import. This is not an Angular feature, but a TypeScript feature. As I said, TypeScript needs to know where the things are. But now with that imported, we can add it to this imports array down here, which is not related to the imports up there. This is simply a feature understood by Angular, since it's part of an Angular module. And now it tells Angular that we want to import some forms features. And this directive we're using is such a form feature. So now if we save that, our app will rebuild. And once it is done, we can go back. And now we see our input, and there's Max inside of it. And if I start typing there, you see that the text below it automatically also updates. This is some magic done by ng Model. We'll dive much deeper into everything we learned here, but this is now our first app with some changes.